So part of the problem with memes from Warbreaker is that it's such a colorful book, and like a lot of the shit posting or creme posting is also pretty visual. But one that stuck out with me is that, the way the mercenaries talk about Parlin's fate seems like they think that Tonk Fa might as well be Bob Ross. There's no murder, only happy little accidents. Just a little bit of mercenary humor for you.
So disturbing.
Well, hello and welcome to Cosmere Casual, the casual reader's guide to the Cosmere. I'm your co-host and mercenary humor enthusiast, Nick Gorman.
And I'm your co-host, AJ Gorman.
So today we're going through the Cosmere connections in Warbreaker. Spoilers abound, not just for Warbreaker, but for everything published in the Cosmere, plus speculation about things that aren't really published yet.
And things that we just have questions and no good answers.
Yeah. So I think you wanted to talk about the world.
Yeah, so just as a heads up, if a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in this episode seems kind of out of the blue and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't read that in the story, it's because most of this information is coming from either other books or mostly Words of Brandon. So no, you didn't miss it in the book, at least most of this stuff, so don't worry about that. So the planet that this that Warbreaker takes place on is called Nalthis.
So when you see in other books things about Nalthian technology, they're referring to the world of Warbreaker.
Yes, but keep in mind that the timeline across the Cosmere is quite vast. So this is much earlier in the Cosmere timeline than other stories where they refer to Nalthian technology. They do not have that technology in Warbreaker.
Yeah.
So, fun fact that this planet existed before the shattering of Adonalsium. So, the Shard Endowment, took ownership of this planet, landed there kind of, I don't know if landed is the right word, but
I mean,
she moved in. She moved in.
In the sense that, like, you land at a new job or she landed there. Sure.
So, she arrived on Nalthis. So, she created humans.
Oh.
So, they were not humans existing on that planet.
Not native.
Prior to her involvement. But it is important to realize that because she was then be able to create them with breaths.
Yeah, I would say that tracks because everybody has that extra little bit of magic. They got that magic touch.
Mm-hmm. Some more fun facts about Nalthis is that there are many different religions that are practiced on Nalthis. The religion of Pankal is actually the only one that kind of directly references endowment. And they don't really worship endowment, but they do recognize her as the voice that calls the returned back. But none of the other religions really.
I was about to say because we see
study or look at.
We see austerism,
yeah.
And we also see the iridescent tones in Warbreaker.
Yeah, and none of them are directly referencing endowment or the shard.
So the shard's name is endowment, and the vessel's name is Edgeley, right? And that's where the tears of Edgeley came from.
You're right, the flowers. And the reason why those flowers are important and why the dyes work so well is because they're actually invested. So those flowers grow near endowment's perpendicularity.
Are they like the adium geodes for ruin?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Woohoo.
Because that's the investiture that's used in Awakening. So yeah, that's actually a pretty good analogy. One of the things that I get annoyed about big thing in Stormlight is one of the reasons why we know that Zahil is from Warbreaker is because he swears by the colors all the time. Like
colors cursed fool.
Right.
You're blue around the ears or whatever.
But the one thing I'm annoyed about with rereading Warbreaker is that I don't hear them swearing like that.
Well, I mean, I think that has to do with how Brando Sando treats language in his books, right? Where he just sort of assumes that they're, that I'm trying to think of how to explain it. Where there's idioms that the character they're not
I know,
speaking
but we didn't
English,
we didn't
right?
see any of the color idioms in Warbreaker.
Right.
So it feels a little bit disingenuous to me, unless we're kind of like thinking that Vasher is using idioms of, pre-Many War history, and those kind of fell out of fashion by the time we read Warbreaker. I don't know. Because language does change over time, and I feel like Brandon does recognize that and play with that.
Yeah, especially in Mistborn era too.
It's just something that annoys me. That's all. Okay.
So we want
Endowment. So endowment is one of the 16 shards. Like you said, the vessel's name is Edgley. We've got Edgley's flowers that grow by the perpendicularity that contain investiture. We see lots of interaction with Edgley / endowment between Hoyd and other characters in the epigraphs of Stormlight.
Yeah.
Now, I did not really internalize that.
How are we supposed to know that was endowment, though? It's not like the letters are signed.
Just smarter people than us on the internet. This is Coppermind. When we read Stormlight, I will point out the clues that point us to that.
Okay.
But just know that if you haven't read it, Stormlight Archive, or you're about to reread it.
It's an Oathbreaker, right? That has the letters back to Hoyd.
I think there's multiple.
Oh my god.
Because there's also letters between Endowment and Sazed, I believe. Sorry, Harmony. We forgot to say that this episode was going to be lots of spoilers.
I did say it.
Oh, did you?
I did.
Good. So, we don't know the species of Edgley.
Oh, like she could be. Oh,
we don't know because there's three species on what's the name? Yolen.
There's the four-armed people, the humans, and dragons.
So we do know that she's not a dragon because Brandon has told us that only one of the vessels is a dragon, and
that's cultivation.
So Edgley's not a dragon, but we do not have confirmation of whether she's human or not.
I mean, if she went on to make humans on an unpopular, come on.
I'm just saying it's not confirmed. But look out for her in Stormlight. From those Stormlight epigraphs, we do hear that she does not like Hoyd, or at least finds him extremely annoying.
I mean, I feel like that's everybody in the Cosmere.
Yeah, she thinks that he's kind of meddling in things far outside of his weight class.
Well, I mean,
which not untrue.
I think in Rhythm of War, Zahal just summarizes it best, where he says, "Wit is an asshole." And yep, that's we the readers love him, but I'm just saying.
Well, we don't know. We
don't know what he's up to.
Tiny fraction. Yeah, we have no idea what Wit's up to. He's always Wit in my mind. He's never Hoyd.
Well, anyway,
Hoyd is a terrible name, I think, but
whatever.
There was something else about Hoyd.
Well, do we want to just jump around because he shows up in Warbreaker?
So because of the conversations between her and Hoyd, we do know that Endowment does not really want to get involved with the other shards. She actually is very upset that all of the other shards didn't hold to their original pact of everybody picking their own planet and staying far away from each other.
Right.
So she doesn't feel bad for the shards that have died or whatever because they decided to occupy another planet with another shard. And she's not very sympathetic to Hoyd's pleas for help.
Fair enough.
One of the things about shards is that their names give a clue as to what characteristics the shard has. So endowment, if you kind of think how does that apply to the magic system and the planet, one of the big things you have to realize is that breath can only be given. You can't forcibly take a breath from someone. So that is endowment. You're
giving it.
You are giving your breath to people, or you're giving your breaths to objects. So that is how endowment shows up in the magic system.
I thought it was just referring to how Blushweaver is.
Ha ha ha. Speaking of that.
Oh, we want to talk.
Just a reminder that, Returned can change the way that they look based on what they feel that beauty is.
Yeah. And
so
we see that
she has a big bust because that's what she thinks beauty is.
Yeah. Well, and So returned are, they're their own special thing, right? Where they are both cognitive shadows and also splinters of endowment.
Okay.
So
pause right there because
well,
I always get confused.
So a splinter is a quote unquote large enough bit of investiture. So it's a bunch of magic that is large enough that it becomes its own sentient thing, right? A sapient thing. So examples of that are, so we've got the returned, but we've also got Sions and Spren, where they're just magic.
The piece of the shard.
They're a piece of the shard, right? But they don't have to be necessarily tied to one specific shard, I think. I don't know. But those are the main ones we see on screen, and returned are another example of this. Now, a cognitive shadow is a spirit, and it cognitive shadows form under certain circumstances that aren't really that clear, but they're formed when a person dies and that person is holding a lot of investiture, and that bit of investiture retains the memories and the personality of that person. And so examples of that are the heralds in Stormlight, or the fused in Kelsier 2. And the returned are sort of a special example because they do kind of they definitely keep the personalities, and they forget a lot because of the trauma of returning.
Mm-hmm.
But they, like we see with Lightsong, he does eventually remember.
Okay, so many things with that.
So many things with what?
So many things with what you just said.
Okay, yeah, come on.
Okay, so I don't even know where to start. We do know that breath can be used to alter memories.
Yes, and I think Vasher even mentions that to Denth.
Well, we see it happen, yes. And we also see it happen because he alters the memory of the child that was kidnapped.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. And we see it in Rhythm of War when Hoyd loses some breaths and, loses the memory of what happened when Teravangi and Todium has the epilogue there in Rhythm of War.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more in another episode.
Yeah, probably.
So returned are a special case because they are splinters and cognitive shadows.
Yep.
Which is not typical.
I think maybe the shades on...
Because you can have a lot of investiture that wasn't...
Yeah.
Like a whole piece of a shard.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking about, because I think if we want to get technical, the returned themselves are cognitive shadows, and it's their divine breath that is what's splintery, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, and because they hold on to the divine breath, okay, and then they die when they give up that divine breath. Okay, they might as well be the same thing.
I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm going to lose my other thought. So, if cognitive shadows are things that die with a whole lot of investiture in them,
yep.
The way that Vasher has been killing the other scholars kind of seems like he formed some level of cognitive shadow, because Denth
no, because that is one of the prerequisites to having a cognitive shadow, but that's not enough by itself usually. So like,
I don't know, because he put a lot of breaths into those people and then killed them.
Right.
And we do know from words of Brandon that, where are my notes about this? Okay, so here's a word of Brandon about it. The breaths that Vasher gave him when he killed him do have an effect on this. There is something left of our steel within Claude.
Ah, yeah. I mean, okay.
So, and we know from other words of Brandon that, in the annotations of Warbreaker, he talked about how the fact that, they shouldn't really be keeping the lifeless soldiers in a dark cave under the palace. Like, it does have there is something left in the lifeless that would be affected by this. It doesn't matter that they're being kept in the dark or not. So there's something there in the lifeless still.
Yeah.
Which is concerning.
I mean, guess.
I think it's gonna be a big issue that the sequel is gonna deal with.
Maybe. We'll see. I don't know. We'll you just got little world building elements, right? And so, there's a lot of things. You can't
put everything in one story.
Right, exactly. So maybe it'll be one sequel, maybe it'll just not be, maybe he'll say that, well, there is something there, there's room to explore more, and maybe,
we do know that Claude and Tongfa and what's her face?
Jules
went up to go see
Yestiel,
Yestiel
the
to try to
the last of the
bring
five
Claude
scholars.
back to life, aka Arsteel back to life.
Mm-hmm.
So the sequel is definitely gonna deal with this.
So do we have more to talk about in terms of Edgley Endowment the Returned?
I think that's enough for now.
Okay.
Actually, the only other fun fact is that a lot of the other shards have trouble kind of figuring out when Hoid comes to their planets or not, but Endowment is actually very keen on figuring out when Hoid shows up on her world or not. So I don't know what makes Endowment special or Nalthus special, but there is a difference between Endowment and the other shards, which is just something good to keep in mind.
Okay. So I think the one other thing I wanted to add about the magic system in general and how it shows up throughout the Cosmere is we see a lot of characters using breaths or awakening throughout the Cosmere. We see Hoid awaken a doll in Oathbringer. We see Zahel awaken clothing during his sparring match with Kaladin in Rhythm of War. There's a dragon interested in the Emerald Sea that awakens. What is he? He awakens something when the captain and Tress are going to meet the dragon in the one scene that he's in. And we know from the Sunlit Man that in the far future Cosmere, breath equivalent units are sort of the standard measurement for how magically invested a person or a thing is. So I think that's breaths become important in the Cosmere, if only because they're a standard way to measure magic.
Mm-hmm. Which I feel like Brandon hasn't been super consistent over the books about like what we're using as a standard unit, because also in you mean the Nightmare Painter, they were comparing it to Elantrians.
Yeah, Elantrians, or but there's other, because we just don't know the timeline of Yumi relative to Sunlit Man. But we know that even in what is it? Is it Words of Radiance?
Well, we assume that Sunlit Man is after.
I
thought there was something that made us think it was after.
Okay, yeah, it could be. But even we see in Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, Sigil attempts to standardize how much Stormlight Kaladin is using, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Using things like specific size gemstones.
Which makes me think that maybe Stormlight and the gems don't hold like a comparatively small amount.
Maybe it's just non-standard. It's hard to standardize with the gem.
And it also makes me wonder, like, are breaths really a standard unit?
Yeah, because they did talk about the different qualities of breaths, right? Even in the annotations for Warbreaker, they talk about how the returned feed on breaths, and the cult of the returned tends to like children's breaths
because they're a little bit more.
They give them a little bit more energy than an elderly person's.
Yes, and you also have, there was another annotation that Brandon talked about, like if you have a vast number of breaths, the quality of them does matter. So if you have the breaths of 1,000 criminals versus 1,000 criminals versus 1,000 saints, it would have an effect on.
Some saints were criminals. That criminality has to do with the law, and saints have to do with morality. Ideally, they're the same, but they're not always. Civil disobedience.
Anyways. How about 1,000 sinners versus 1,000
We're all
saints?
Sinners, dear.
It would have a difference on the bearer of those breaths.
Repent.
We just don't know what that effect would be or how strong that effect would be. So Brandon, we need that sequel. That would be very, very helpful.
Yeah. I know we both want to talk about the Royal Locks. Do we want to talk about that, or do we want to go into World Hoppers?
Let's talk about Royal Locks.
So the Royal Locks, that's how the Idrian throne, people who are royalty, can change their hair color and length by focusing
on the right word?
Yes.
Because it happens subconsciously.
Sometimes it happens consciously.
And that too.
I was about to say, because Ciri grows her hair by just focusing really hard and, yeah.
Anyway, so let's start with a little bit of history. So Vo...
The first
returned. Is the name of the first returned that Endowment created. He had 5 visions or whatever, and he actually had a child.
And he died a week later. How did he,
Well, I mean, you just have to inseminate someone. You don't have to.
But apparently that's not something that they know how to do readily. So he had a week to figure it out, I guess. Maybe that was one of the visions.
We don't know how return. There is a way. Brandon has confirmed in the annotations that there is a way for a return to father a child, but we don't know.
I think he tells that in the text. That's,
Well, there's people lie in the text.
All right, fair enough.
Because at one point the priest tells Ciri
just the normal way.
Yeah, or no, we never the god kings are never genetically whatever, but that's not true.
Yeah.
The annotations tell us that there is a way. We don't know it.
I meant to mention this in the last episode, but Suzerain not knowing how children were made, I feel like they did it better in Bridgerton. They certainly did it hornier in Bridgerton. Anyway, you were saying something, dear.
I mean, there's so many examples of them using it as plot devices in movies and stuff.
You read a lot more romantically than I do, though.
I'm talking about. I'm on. There was some. Anyway, I'll talk to you about it later. But listeners, if you want to email us some examples of this being a big plot device in movies or books, go ahead and send that to us.
How was Babby formed?
Okay. Anyways, back to Vo. So yes, he somehow happened upon creating a child within the 7 days that he was, or fathering a child within the 7 days that he was alive after becoming returned. So because the royal family is genetically descended from a returned, that gives them the royal locks. So their hair color does tend to change according to their mood. Bone white for scared, yellow for happy, and
red for angry,
so on and so forth.
So the way that they explain it in the book is that only legitimate heirs to the throne can have the royal locks. It has nothing to do with genetics, because if someone who's not an heir, someone who's not on the throne has a kid, they're not necessarily going to have the locks unless they are in line to the throne, which makes me think that there's an element of connection to it, not just genetics.
Right. But we don't really know.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting was we see Ciri talk about, getting hungry after she, forces her hair to get longer, and, after she changes, forces it to change color for people all the time, right?
I mean, that kind of makes sense to me.
Yes. But, so it is something related to investiture, and she uses food to power it. That we see that happen more prominently in Stormlight Archive, where Lift converts food into lifelight. And so I wonder if there is a way for the return to use food in place of breaths, like to convert food to investiture, to shape changing or breaths, or just not dying after a week. Because we even hear, even in the book, Lightsong talks about not needing to eat, but just enjoying the experience. Well, maybe he's just not eating right.
I don't know if I'm convinced of that. I think it's just because there is physical matter needed to grow the hair, and that has to come from your body.
Vasher doesn't talk about being hungry after he changes shape and size.
Would Vasher say something? I mean, was there really an appropriate time in the book for him to say, I'm hungry?
All I'm saying is, I think there's something to explore there. Whether or not it will be explored,
Well, when we read the sequel, maybe we'll come back to this, but I think not. So we do get kind of confirmation from Vasher at the end of this novel that people who have the royal locks can change other aspects of their physical appearance, not just their hair or their facial hair. They can change their physical, but they can't change their physical features enough to look like another person, though. But they do have more ability than just their hair. And I think I haven't really looked back at descriptions of Azure or Vivenna in Stormlight to see if there's much of a difference, but I imagine there might be. The other thing to note with royal locks is that people with royal locks have a much easier time learning awakening.
Vash even mentioned that it's Nightblood in a scene where Nightblood says that it likes Vivenna, and Vasher's like, well, of course you like her. She's descended from Returned. You like all the Returned.
Which brings up Nightblood.
I have a lot to say about Nightblood.
You have a lot?
I have a lot.
Okay, well, one of the things I wanted to make sure that we talked about is that in the creation of Nightblood, endowment was involved.
Oh, yeah.
which I didn't know about until I read it on Coppermind. So thank you, Coppermind. The other thing that's not directly pointed out, but Vasher and Shashara had been off-world. They had only ever been to Roshar.
So they were inspired by the shard blades they saw there. Was it the shard blades or the honor blades, or both?
What my sources that I read said shard blades. So they were inspired by that, by their visit on Roshar to make Nightblood.
A magical talking sword. Okay, so we're talking about world hoppers. So we do see. Yeah, let's back it up a second. World hoppers. Hoid appears in this book. He's the storyteller in Hallandren that Ciri goes to get a history of the God Kings.
History of the planet, really, too.
Yeah. So Hoidseen repeatedly emphasizes that he tells that story using sand as an aid, where he's trailing sand out of his hand, he's mixing in black sands, white sands, dust, flower petals, whatever. And when Ciri asks where he learned that strange way of telling stories, he says, many, many years ago from a man who didn't know who he was, in a distant place where two lands meet and gods have died. So that's the repeated emphasis on the sand and how entranced Ciri is by it makes me think that it's a form of magic. And the way that he talks about having actually learned it and the way he described it makes it sound like it's literally a magic system from a different world that we just haven't seen yet on screen.
Okay, so you don't think it's what's the graphic novel?
White Sands?
White Sands.
Well, because White Sands literally involves them, telekinetically manipulating sand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, and sure, the sand changes from white to black, but, he talks about mixing
invested versus not invested.
Yeah, but he talks about, and there is some of it where it changes color, but it's, there's, the dust and the flower petals. I don't know. It just seems different.
Well, there is a magic system was there a magic system originally on Yolen?
Light weaving.
Light weaving.
Which we see Hoid use in Oathbringer, where he tells another story using sands and dust, and I think also in Way of Kings, maybe, where
so is this the same then, or different?
The times that we see him use that, Yolish light weaving in Stormlight Archive, the people who's telling the story to see images of the story he's trying to tell. Ciri doesn't get visions like that, so I don't know.
Okay, something to think about.
Yeah, something to think about.
Other world hoppers. So we don't know a whole lot, but Brandon did do a word of Brandon that the Lemix's nurse, way back in the beginning of the story, is a Terrace world hopper. So
she's from Scadrial, and she could, or maybe, she might be or might not be a Feruchemist, because Feruchemy is, genetic for the Terrace people.
Right, but we don't know anything really beyond that.
Yep. I think the most prominent world hoppers are Vasher, Nightblood, and Vivenna. I mean, other than Hoid, right? Where spot the Hoid, right? So Vasher we see in the Stormlight Archive, and the rationale there is that he needs to eat investiture, right? At least once a week. And so Roshar has an easy, reliable form of investiture that comes about that often, and he can hold on to it and use it as fuel instead of breaths. And so he's the ardent Zahel, and he shows up in Words of Radiance, and thereafter.
So, fun fact: he intentionally chose the name Zahel because it's very close to the word Nihil, so the Nihil bond, which means connection to the divine in Alethi.
Was that?
So
is that a word of Brandon?
Yes.
Okay, I was about to say, I was like, oh my god, well, how are you supposed to get that?
I have no fucking clue. It's all on Coppermind. But Zahel is intentionally close to the word Nahil to hint at his returned nature, which also has me another question. Like, okay, so returned are supposed to have these purposes, right? Like a reason to give away their breath and fix something or do something. And
yeah, because they get endowment gives them a vision of the future. So presumably endowment has a lot of fortune or whatever, lets you see the future.
Right. So you're supposed to agree to go back and so that you can change something. Well,
but they don't all succeed. And they don't have to necessarily die doing what they were going to do.
But we do have a word to Brandon that Vasher has not had an opportunity to change a thing that he wants, that he agreed to change.
Well, he's done an awful lot in terms of shaping the Cosmere.
Yeah, so that let me pull that back. So Vasher has way too many fucking names, okay? His original name, I believe, was
Warbreaker. Oh, wait, before he returned.
After he we don't know what his birth name was. After he returned, there was Talaxin, and his god name was Warbreaker the Peaceful.
There's Kalad the Usurper.
Kalad the Usurper. Strife Lover. Peacegiver the Blessed. We've got Vasher, and then Zahil. So that's a lot of fucking names for one person. And the reason why he has a lot of these names is because he started off as kind of a somewhat, normal god, and then he actually heard another god told him a vision that he had about an upcoming war, and Vasher kind of took it upon himself to try to get the monarchy to prepare for the war, but the monarchy was like, no, like, we're not going to preemptively strike against our neighbors. So then Vasher actually started a rebellion. So that's where he got the name Kalad the Usurper, because he usurped the monarchy. And then at some point, he changed his mind about, I shouldn't have started this war. And then he started working to end the war. That's where he got Peacegiver the Blessed. So, yeah.
And somewhere doing all that, he also found the time, to create a single breath command to create Lifeless. And
was that Vasher himself? It was. Okay.
That was Vasher, I believe. I was either in the annotations or in the text of Warbreaker itself, I thought. And then also helped Shashara to create Nightblood.
Yes. It's a lot to digest.
It's a lot. He's all over the place. So Nightblood also shows up in Stormlight Archive in not the Way of Kings, in Words of Radiance onwards. I think he goes by Sword Nimi.
I like Sword Nimi.
Sword Nimi. I mean, it's not gendered. It's a sword. It doesn't, but it's the sword given to Zeth by the Herald Nail. Nail isn't exactly subtle about it.
Well, hold on. Let me back up. So Word of Brandon does confirm that Vasher and Nightblood did show up on Roshar after the events of Warbreaker together. And then they had apparently a falling out.
Anyway.
So somewhere along the way, Nail got the sword.
Yeah. And I think the first chronological time that it appears is in a flashback, one of Dalinar's flashbacks in Oathbringer. I forget the exact words, but the Night Watcher offers Dalinar a black sword with the power to defeat any enemy, which...
What?
Yeah. The Night Watcher offers Nightblood to Dalinar.
Oh my gosh.
When they're trying to, when the Night Watcher's trying to figure out what boon to give Dalinar, what she can do for him.
Oh my gosh.
So...
You're blowing my mind right now. Okay.
Yeah. So the exact way they became separated in the timeline of that...
This sword gets around.
I know! So, yeah, it's kind of a mystery.
But we do... All right, I have another word of Brendan, that Nightblood has visited more than 2 planets in the Cosmere. Huh. So when we say the sword Nightblood has gotten around, he has gotten around.
It's a sword. It doesn't have a gender.
It has gotten around.
I know, I do the same thing.
It has gotten around.
Yeah. I feel like Nightblood is like one of the most important crossover characters in the Cosmere, maybe even, up there with Hoyd, because like Nightblood works in a special way, right? If I remember right, I thought there was a word of Brandon where Nightblood kills things in the physical realm, but also the spiritual realm, right? So people who are killed by Nightblood don't go to the spiritual realm. They don't go in the beyond. They get just eaten. I
do remember that, yes.
And so Nightblood, being a physical weapon as well as a spiritual and cognitive weapon, it's very important, and it's how Taravangian kills Reyes, the original Odium, and takes up that shard. Don't know if he could have done that with any other weapon.
Oh, sorry, what? Taravangian does what?
He takes Nightblood and kills Reyes during a vision that Odium is giving him. And so he takes up the shard of Odium because Nightblood was there.
It's been way too long since I've read Stormlight.
Yeah, so I mean, Nightblood being a super weapon, not just able to destroy whole walls and, lay waste to dozens of soldiers at a time, but also able to kill the vessel of a shard without killing the shard itself. So,
which is weird, isn't it?
Yes, it's weird, but also very important. So, Nightblood, very exciting.
All right. Coppermine does tell us that Nightblood is one of the most heavily invested things in the Cosmere. It is far more invested than other powerful magical objects like shard blades or the bands of mourning. The only things more invested are shards themselves.
Yep.
Nightblood did not start off that strong, but grew in power over time.
Because it eats, it eats breaths from the wielder when Nightblood is drawn, and it also, eats the things that it destroys.
So is our assumption that he doesn't actually consume all of them? He just kind of holds on to them, so he's kind of just gaining power.
I think it has to do with the smoke, because I believe the smoke that comes off is corrupted breaths that Nightblood has consumed. So I think it accumulates more, but I believe that, it also loses, it's not perfect and it loses things through the smoke.
Well, yeah, because the words that they used to create him, the command was destroy evil, right?
Destroy!
So by that logic, it couldn't destroy good investiture.
Well, investiture can neither be created nor destroyed, blah, blah, blah. It's like mass. So, I mean, it continues to accumulate and then within Nightblood, but I believe it's somewhat leaky as well.
Yeah, but it's probably taking on a whole lot more than it is leaked, which is why it becomes the most dots. Invested.
Yeah, connecting the dots, yes. And I think we might have talked about, it's been a few weeks since we recorded last, but I think we talked about this last time, but like Shashara, the reason why Vasher killed Shashara was because she was interested in creating more Nightbloods, and
she wanted to spread the knowledge to everybody.
How, she was willing to make more Nightbloods be created, right?
Which is a scary thought, at least. That's what Vasher thought.
That's what Vasher thought. It's kind of like, I mean, in Cosmere terms, that's sort of like the creation of the atomic bomb, right? Where I see Vasher kind of like an Oppenheimer kind of person, where he was willing to create the super weapon and then immediately regretted it.
I've only watched the first half of Oppenheimer.
I haven't seen the movie, but like I'm familiar with the story, right?
I actually paid attention to history class.
So, and that brings me into Vivenna, who shows up in Oathbringer as Captain Azure, with a color for a name being the clue that that she's a world hopper. And I think her hair changes color when they enter Shadesmar. And she is carrying a sword that is described in Stormlight Archive terms as kind of like a shard blade, but
definitely not a shard blade.
But definitely not a shard blade, and it sucks the color out of people when she stabs them with it. So it's I think someone asks if it's like Nightblood, and she says that it's an inferior copy, but it's still she tried to make another Nightblood,
which is also scary.
Yes. So to me, I think that's there's something brewing there where she's trying to hunt Vasher and Nightblood, and she's got another copy of Nightblood, and we know that Vasher killed his last love interest, Shashara, because she was gonna make more Nightbloods. So it seems to me like they probably had a falling out since the end of Warbreaker compared to Oathbringer. So. I also think her character arc between Warbreaker to Oathbringer is very it makes me happy, where some of her Warbreaker scenes take on an extra ironic tone when you compare to her in Oathbringer, where she's trying, in Warbreaker, she's trying so hard to be humble, and I'm so, whatever. But she refuses to wear trousers. She's still haughty in all these ways. And she's sort of helpless when it comes to fighting. In Oathbringer, she dresses exclusively in men's clothes. She's the captain of the Wall Guard, and she is, she's by far the most competent fighter among them.
Well, speaking of that, Nightblood also remarks like, "Oh, it's so funny. Vasher is like a sword teacher," and which is really funny because Denthal always said he was terrible with swords.
Right. Yeah.
But it just goes to show that if you're effectively immortal, there's a lot that can change.
Yeah. Well, or
over time.
If you have 1,000 years to practice swordplay, even if you're bad compared to the person who's naturally good, you're still like miles better than us mere mortals, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's I'm interested to see where and if that goes anywhere. I like her character arc so far because, let's be honest, like everybody else reading Warbreaker, I thought she was really annoying the first time I read through. But, sometimes characters start off annoying so that way they can have a more satisfying arc. And I think that's what's going on with Vivenna/Azure. The other thing about, her having a copy of Nightblood is we know from the Sunlit Man, as well as I believe Six of the Dusk, or maybe its sequel, that one of the things about the far future Cosmere is that there will be a conflict between Scadrial and Roshar, and we've got a couple of different super weapons that we've seen on screen now between Nightblood and the giant bomb in the End of the Lost Metal. I wonder if there's going to be sort of an arms race between the Rosharans and the Scadrians.
This is just getting huge.
I know. But it's, we're seeing but we see the groundwork that is being laid.
I'm still very just concerned about the
lifeless being kept in the dark.
Champion, Odine's champion and Dalinar having to face off or whatever.
We're going to find out about that in a year or so, right?
I thought it was the end of this year.
I don't know. Whenever Stormlight 5 comes out. Shit, we gotta get up with our reading.
I know.
My God.
This is way too many books. This is why it's just like it's been so like I reread the Stormlight multiple times, except maybe book 4. I think I've only read book 4 once. But it's just like it's so hard to keep all of it in your brain because by the time you read all of the other books, it's been like at minimum 3 years.
I mean, listen, I hate to admit this, but I am going to be when it's time for us to reread Stormlight Archive, I'm going to be listening at like 1.5 times speed because they're like 50 hours long, and we gotta, now we're making a podcast about it.
I don't think we can. We won't be able to
pace.
We won't be able to fit that into 3 episodes. I mean, because the epigraphs themselves are going to be one whole episode.
Ugh, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is the main spine of the Cosmere.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
All right. I think that's kind of.
Go ahead.
I do have one thing, but it's actually not a connection. It's a coincidence.
Okay.
So there was a word of Brandon about this, so we know that it is a coincidence, not intentional. The first letter that Ciri teaches Susebron is Shash, which, coincidentally, is the same name as the Alethi glyph for dangerous, which is, the Shash brand is what Kaladin has on his forehead to identify that he is dangerous. So, there was a fan theory that, oh, fuck, this is some really detailed foreshadowing that she's influencing Susebron to be dangerous, that, her teaching him is, it's destabilizing. And, this is B Money giving us a hint. No. He in some interview or Reddit AMA, whatever, he confirmed that, oh shit, I didn't think about that. That was a coincidence. So.
Bound to happen.
Yeah. But so I saw that in my reread and I was like, oh my God. Then I had to look it up and nope, nothing there.
And there's a lot to talk about with errors in Mistborn trilogy as well. The first.
Oh yeah, there was.
So we'll talk about that.
Yep.
Later, but the other questions that I have that we just don't have answers to that I'll just list them and we'll just leave it there. Why are the 5 scholars named the 5 scholars? Like I understand there's 5 of I understand there's 5 of them and they were doing research, but I still don't understand why were they collectively thought of as a group. I don't know. I think there's more there. That we don't know.
When they could be named the Ivy League or the ACC or sorry,
I don't know. I think there's more there. It wasn't a mistake that Denth remembers who his sister is.
Oh, interesting.
So they were siblings before they were returned.
And then they both returned.
And then they returned, and then they remember the fact that they're siblings, which is...
That's not how it's supposed to work.
Right. Is not how it normally works. So no idea what's going on there. A person's breath is not the entirety of a person's spiritual aspect.
Yeah, because otherwise drabs would be even worse than drab.
Yeah.
Huh.
But we don't know like percentages or how much. Anyways, so just some things to think about.
Thanks for podcasting with me, dear.
Yeah, it's you said that we weren't going to have anything to talk about for this episode.
I didn't say we didn't have.
Maybe you did.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, listener, for listening to our podcast. If you want to, please send us feedback or thoughts and questions. You can reach out to us from our email at cosmerecasual@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is licensed through Tribe of Noise. The artist is Ketsa, and the song is Odyssey.
And until next time, keep your wits about you.